All right, what's going on? It's been a little while since I put out an episode, so I thought it'd be good to tackle a topic today, and that is intuitive eating. So, intuitive eating is an interesting one, and I think I've had maybe an interesting relationship with it in terms of as a practice, maybe because of some of my own ideas around it. And here's what I'd say: intuitive eating, it might sound daunting if it feels like you can't trust yourself around food. That's a really interesting place to be, right? But if intuitive eating is something you'd like to learn, but maybe there's some worries that, hey, this might not work for me. You're in the right place today because really what I want you to take away from what I chat about today is just how to, like, really understanding how you can begin to learn some of the concepts around intuitive eating and just ultimately, even if it's not right for you, maybe just to feel a little bit more relaxed around food. And so, before I dive into the meat of the topic today, I just want to share that, as always, I do have a free 7-day challenge. In fact, I have three of them. And if you'd like to check any of them out, whether it's End Emotional Eating, Fat Loss Fundamentals, or a Build Your Roadmap, which is how do you take these tools from the other two challenges and turn it into an ongoing way of living, you can go to freedomnutrition.rocks. That's freedom nutrition, all one word, .rocks/7-day challenge, no spaces. And you can sign up, and I'll get you kicking off on that 7-day challenge. So, pardon me, let's dive into it today. So, actually, and really a good question to ask is, how do you feel about intuitive eating? How do you feel when you hear the term? Because I just imagine there's a lot of misconceptions around it. So, pardon me, let me share a bit of a story. So, just going back a couple of years, I was in the office. I was working down in Calgary, which is, for those who aren't from Alberta, it's a big city in Alberta. And a coworker brought in this kind of assortment of cookies and baked goods for everyone to enjoy. And it was mid-afternoon, like probably 3, and it'd been kind of just a slog of a day. And I remember looking at this chocolate chip cookie, and oh man. But the moment I looked at it, I remember, like, just hearing these thoughts, like, cookies, they're full of sugar and fat. It's not my, it's not my cheat day. Or if I eat this cookie, I'm going to gain weight. Or really, ultimately, just this idea, almost like this idea that if I eat this cookie, I'm being bad, you know, which is it's such a funny way to think about it. Like, I'm being bad for making a choice to eat something, but yet that was what was kind of running through my head. And so I remember just deciding to resist the cookie. Okay, nope, not going to give in. Whatever. I went back to my office, but of course, I'm still thinking about the cookie. But I'm determined kind of not not to give into it. But fast forward a few minutes later, maybe 15 minutes later, and I'm kind of scratching around the office, like, looking for something to eat. And in one of the drawers, there's some of these rice cakes, and they have like a thin layer of I don't know if you've ever seen them. These rice cakes that have like this thin layer of chocolate over the top of them. And so then I start munching on them because they're lower calorie than a cookie or something like that. But by the time a couple of minutes later roll around, there's like 6 in a packet, right? And I'd eaten all 6 of them. And then I get up and I went over to one of my coworkers' desks, and she has just like this fishbowl with like Lindt chocolates in there, and I somehow found myself like helping myself to a couple of those while kind of chit chatting or casually or pretending to casually make chit chat, while really I wanted some more of her chocolates. And then I was at that point, I was like, well, forget this, I might as well just go back into the office, into the break room there, and grab a cookie. Which I did, and I ate the cookie, and like this wave of guilt. I remember this like wave of guilt coming over me. To like, I've caved, I've failed, I've done something wrong, because not only did I, it started with a craving the cookie and deciding to resist the craving, but it just kind of it created this spiral effect, and ultimately I find this place where I'm struggling with food guilt. And actually, that's a good question to ask: is that something that you've ever struggled with? This idea of, uh, pardon me, this idea of food guilt, and because I want to paint a picture of like a different scenario, because and how I see myself navigating this scenario nowadays, which is quite a bit different than I would have a few years back. So let's say that, again, someone brings in a box of, in Canada here, we've got a place called Tim Hortons. And so let's say they bring in a bunch of, Tim Hortons cookies and donuts and things like that. And I decide to, that, hey, I'd really like to eat that chocolate chip cookie. So I go in there, I take that chocolate chip cookie. I'm trying to say that twice, and then I go and I take it. Maybe I actually even go outside because the sun's shining, and I just eat that chocolate chip cookie. I eat it slowly. I sort of taste the chewiness and whatnot, taste the flavor of the cookie. And once I'm done eating, I just go back to my office and finish my work. And it's a totally different eating experience. And so you would think, well, what changed about this? And I would say, like, I started to learn about this idea of intuitive eating And I like to think about it in a couple of other ways too. I think about it like informed eating or mindful eating as well. But really just letting go of some of the absolutely restrictive like food rules that I thought I had to have in place to keep me safe. And so maybe it's helpful to kind of give this definition of what is intuitive eating, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of misconceptions around it. I think the biggest one being like just eat whatever you want whenever you want. And really, so in a nutshell, intuitive eating is this idea that you're the expert of your body and its hunger cues, right? And so I would say intuitive eating is really like a personal process. This maybe the idea of even trying to learn it. That there are the formal practice of it that was put forward probably 25 years ago by a couple of dietitians. I think there's probably 10 principles to it and whatnot. But really, I'd say that even that might sound like a lot. Like, oh, I got to learn. Make it simple. The underlying idea is really eat when you're genuinely physically hungry, and then stop when you're full, and really taking away this idea of putting foods on a pedestal, and I can only eat these foods at these times. Sorry, I got a bit of a frog in my throat today for some reason. So I think, anyways, it's this idea of having unconditional permission to eat, because as scary as that sounds, interestingly, when we take away some of these restrictions, we take away even maybe the attraction. And ultimately, I think the place we're trying to get to is where we're not managing emotions with food. So, like I said, when I first heard about this idea of intuitive eating, like I was worried that, if I start to eat, I'm going to eat whatever I want, whenever I want, and I'm totally going to lose all self-control. Nutrition principles fly out the window. And I think what I was missing was this idea that like intuitive eating is a little more nuanced than just, eating whatever you want, whenever you want. And so I want to move into just talking practically, just a couple of ideas around it. What can this look like for you? And again, what I hope is not necessarily, I'm not necessarily trying to convince you that you must become an intuitive eater, but I want to put forward some ideas so you might realize, okay, maybe there's a way that I can put this into practice in my own life, and maybe it's not all the time, but it's definitely a tool that I can have in my toolbox. And so, yeah, as we said, intuitive eating is really this idea that you're the expert of your body and its hunger signals. I think maybe that's a bit of an oversimplified definition according to the formal textbook version of it, but I think that's a pretty easy way to say it. And so, and I'd be curious, like if the thought of trying intuitive eating would feel uncomfortable, like, oh, I'm not sure how I feel about trying to do that. I feel like I lose control. How does that feel for you? Yeah. So intuitive eating, really, I would say the first thing is this idea of eat when you're hungry. And what do we mean by that? Because it's funny that it sounds like such a simple phrase, but eat when you're hungry. So I think learning how to eat according to hunger starts with figuring out what does it actually feel like to be hungry, which again sounds like a crazy kind of funny thought, right? And you think about what are the physical sensations I feel in my body when I'm actually hungry. Maybe it's a rumbling stomach. I think that's probably the most common one that we think about, but it's not the only signal. Could be tired, feeling a bit like sluggish, lethargic, difficulty focusing, maybe a slight headache, feeling irritable. And you might not feel all of these signals, or you might even feel totally different signals. But the idea of if you're going to learn how to eat according to hunger, or eat when you're hungry and when that opportunity is available, because I understand, I put that caveat in there because I understand some people, you work set hours and you get a set break, and it's like you eat on that break. That you don't have the freedom to just eat willy-nilly when you want. I get that. But, when you do have the opportunity to eat according to these principles and eat according to hunger, this is kind of what it's going to look like. And I would say, like, just spend a few days. You got the time. Spend a few days just paying attention. Like, how do you feel physically, mentally, emotionally when you haven't eaten for a few hours? Just getting this idea of what does actual hunger feel like. It seems like a crazy concept, but you think about how we've been conditioned to eat and eat and eat, and you feel a twinge and you eat a snack. Like, that's the way that we've been conditioned to eat, to sell more snack foods, really. And so if we know what being hungry actually feels like, it's easier to identify when you're actually hungry, because if you're going to eat when you're hungry, it means you never really get to the point where you're, I guess famished, because I hear people use this language like, oh, I was starving. And I've really tried to challenge people on using that language, particularly the word starving, because I'm like, if you were actually in the place of starvation, you're in a serious medical emergency, right? What's really going on here is you felt, a pretty strong hunger signal. But whenever we use the word starving, our brain connects this. It's a very emotionally compelling word because, hey, if you're starving, you're at risk of dying, So chances are you're not actually starving. So like, I know we use this word, but I just wish that we would use a different word. Anyways, so the point being that when we start to learn to eat according to hunger, there's a lot we're not going to get to that point where we feel out of control around food. And then on top of that, as we like eat a bit more slowly, a little more relaxed around food, a little bit more mindfully, we can probably stop when we're comfortably full and satisfied. But really, like in the beginning, I'd say it's just more important to think about like what does hunger feel like? What does actual physical hunger feel like? Because maybe if especially if you've been dieting for a number of years and trying to lose weight for a number of years, it's like we get used to like turning like ignoring and suppressing that signal and not listening to it because we feel such guilt around eating. I know I did. I felt so tortured around eating. And so I'm kind of curious, how do you feel about trying to listen to hunger? Like as an idea, like does it make you feel uncomfortable, nervous, like not sure I can do this? And I would say like, be patient with yourself. The signals, like literally, they might actually be rusty from not being used as a way of indicating whether or not you should eat. Because when you think about it again, from the time we were a kid, we were probably taught to eat on a schedule, and noon rolls around, and how often do we think about lunch, whether or not we're hungry? Oh, it's noon. Well, noon's when we eat. We eat for entertainment, we eat when we're bored, we eat when we're celebrating, we eat in response to cravings. And so learning to actually figure out what does hunger feel like is one of the most helpful things that you can do, especially if you really want to, because I think intuitive eating at its heart is becoming like at peace with food. And so when we eat when we're hungry, we kind of tell our body, hey, things are going to be okay, like I'm going to take care of you. So I think kind of the next one here is this idea of challenging the food police in your head. And I think that's such a funny term, the food police, but I like this idea because the food police, it's like that voice in your head that tells you you shouldn't eat that because, and so on and so forth. And so actually, I'm kind of curious, if do you have the food police in your head? And if so, like, what do they say? I think we have these internal thoughts about like what is good and what is bad, and these moral judgments around the food choices, and it kind of overrides actually the signals that our bodies send us in terms of, hey, you should eat or you don't need to eat. And so let's say, for example, you're thinking about what you want for lunch, and hey, a sandwich sounds kind of tasty. But then the food police would kind of come in and ruin the idea of eating a sandwich because it's like, oh, that's way too many carbs. I can't believe you're eating bread. Oh my gosh, you should probably eat a salad. And it's like, it's they coming from your head, but it's not really coming from your intuition, right? It's coming from like messaging that like food guilt that we've internalized. So instead of like giving into these voices, it's like you're allowed to question them, you're allowed to challenge them. And I think after a few days or maybe weeks really of starting to listen, like what is that internal voice saying? You start to notice patterns. You can identify that like certain foods, the food police in your head tell you you're not supposed to eat it, and so on. And you start to see like when do they show up in what situations? Is it dinner time? Is it snack time? Is it the evening? That sort of thing, right? And so it's like when you're thinking about I want to try and see what it would be like to learn to eat intuitively. So okay, cool. Keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate this. Don't try and memorize like 10 principles or things like that. Just like really, really simple. If your first thought is I want to eat a sandwich, it's like eat a sandwich. And then you can kind of get comfortable with the idea of okay, I didn't let the food police ruin my meal, And then once you get more comfortable, you can start taking into account other things like, nutrition and wanting to eat to nourish my body and so on. But it's like just let's keep it simple. And I think the other thing I would say is focus on satisfaction. Again, keeping it really, really simple. So once we let go of like food guilt and we kind of kick out the food police in our head, we kind of have more options in terms of what we can eat and not feel guilty. So when we don't have to feel guilty about choosing to consume any food, and here's the scary thought, you can kind of eat anything at any time. Now, I think that's great, and there's a lot of choice, but this is where satisfaction as an idea comes in. I think this is maybe the factor that goes, okay, this is how I don't feel so entirely out of control, right? Because when you're deciding what to eat, you may not always eat the first thing that pops into your head. Instead, you figure, okay, what feels the most satisfying in that moment? Because I'm pretty sure most of you had the experience of eating some kind of junk food and eating, you're like, wow, I feel almost less satisfied after eating this than before. And that's actually what they're engineered to do. They're engineered to keep you eating and eating and eating and bypass like the internal cues your body would give you, right? And so, and I noticed that, like, let's say if I choose to, I don't know, eat a couple of cookies or something like that, I very often have a bit of an energy crash afterwards, and it makes perfect sense. But it's like starting to tune into how do I feel after I eat that food as well. And so the idea here isn't that you're going on a quote unquote hunger fullness diet exactly, but really what does it actually feel like to be satisfied when I eat? And I think the first bite of food is always going to be the one that we enjoy the most, and every bite after that kind of has diminishing returns. In other words, every bite doesn't taste quite as good as that first bite, and so at a certain point you go, I feel like I've had enough. And so I think it's, again, I'm really trying to keep it simple, this idea of just eating until I feel satisfied, right? And here's the thing: if you're trying to learn a skill like this, you're not always going to get it right. I think that's another really important thing to think about, is you're not always going to get it right. But this is, we have to, like, this is a skill we have to learn. It's something you have to practice. Just like a rumbling stomach isn't the only sign of hunger. We could say maybe a very full stomach isn't the only sign of satisfaction or fullness, right? And so really the ultimate goal here is to, I think, just get more comfortable around the idea of eating, get more comfortable, like kind of learning to trust your body. And so, really kind of the last thing I want to touch on here, because I think this is kind of an important thing to touch on. And that's because here's what I would say, maybe in response to this idea of intuitive eating. There's some challenges around it. And part of the challenge is our modern food environment, right? Our modern food environment encourages us to overeat all the time. Not only that, our modern food environment sort of involves foods that have been engineered to really bypass our bodies, like hunger, satiety, fullness, that kind of thing. And so, what's the antidote to that? Is really eating with mindfulness. And again, maybe it sounds a little bit cliche, but it's just this idea of being present, because it's going to decrease the chances that you're going to use food as kind of like a mask for a deeper emotional need. So it's impossible to eat intuitively and not eat emotionally if we're not being mindful. In other words, if you're like totally checked out, you probably can't eat intuitively. If you're rushed, if you're stressed, that kind of thing. And so I think why I'm sharing this is I want to put this caveat in here around this idea of intuitive eating. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think it's one that, like, it's a tool in my toolbox. But I also understand that if I'm rushed, if I'm stressed, if I'm feeling busy, that kind of stuff, that if mindfulness isn't present, it's more difficult to eat intuitively. And so sometimes it's nice to have a few of the tools in your toolbox that can kind of accompany that. And so when you feel like eating, it's like, do I actually need this food right now? Or am I using this food for something else? Do I need a break? Do I need some fresh air? Do I need some social interaction? Do I want a hug? Because we often use food in these other ways. And it's like, am I using this to try to mask or cover up an emotion? Hey, I feel anxious. Well, why do I feel that way? Well, didn't sleep that great. I got a big project I'm working on, all that kind of stuff. Just acknowledge that it's okay to have feelings, and kind of, do I really need food to make this feeling go away? Or is it okay that I just have these feelings, And so I think I just want to leave it there. I think we've covered kind of enough there. I just wanted to bring some of my thoughts around intuitive eating to this conversation. I hope that you find it helpful. And again, I want to put this out there. If you feel like, hey, this is something that I want to, like, learn more about, want to know more about, I do have the 3 free 7-day challenges that can really help you get more in touch with your own food journey, your own health journey. And you can go to freedomnutrition.rocks/7-day challenge if you want to check any of those out. Otherwise, let's just say, hey, thanks so much for tuning in. I really do hope that you found this helpful, and we'll see you next time.